Hi everybody, welcome to Bike Revs. I'm Mark. Now today I'm going to look at the suspension on my bike. Why? Well, because I've had this for nearly 3 years and I've done nearly 20,000 miles on it, but I've never adjusted the suspension at all. So whilst it feels okay, I want to make absolutely sure it's as good as it can be. Now page 154 of the manual is my friend, and it tells me that I can adjust both the preload and the rebound settings, both front and rear. Now the rear one's an interesting one because I've obviously got pillion seat and I've got pillion pegs down here, so I can put a passenger on the back of this bike. Now when I do that, obviously it adds a lot of weight onto the bike and you need to adjust the preload. It's a matter of safety. So with the bike being designed to do that, you'd think that was something you can do yourself. But once again, referring to the manual, it tells me that if I want to adjust the spring on the back, then I need to take this in to Kawasaki and let the dealer do it. Now, I'm not going to do that every time I want to put a passenger on the back. And so I'm going to get onto eBay after this video. I'm going to go and find myself a spanner so that I can do the rear suspension myself. Now obviously that's a very particular type of spanner and I want one that fits this bike because there's not an awful lot of room to get in there. So that's what I'll be doing as soon as this video ends. But in the meantime, we'll have to save that for part 2 and concentrate part 1 on the front suspension. Right then, if I look in the manual, it gives me all the suspension settings which come as default from the factory. Now the suspension on the front can only be adjusted on this one side, and there's a nut and a screw head there that I can adjust. Now, in terms of the preload, I need to get a 14mm socket on the top of that nut, and if I was to turn it all the way anti-clockwise and then come forwards clockwise 11 turns, that would be the factory default setting. So 11 turns from anti-clockwise, factory default. And that's exactly where this one is set because I've tried it just to make sure. Now the screw in the middle adjusts the rebound, and if I turn that all the way clockwise and then come back 6 clicks, then it will give me the default setting for that. So as I say, I've tested both of those things and they are both in exactly the right place for factory default. Now I've already learnt a couple of things about these. First of all, what I wasn't sure about was if I turn this nut at the top all the way to the left, could I keep going and then it would come out of the top and maybe I'd get covered in fork oil or something? And the same goes for the screw. Has it got to stop at either side, or can you completely unscrew them? And I can tell you now, the answer is there is a stop at both sides. So now that I know there's a stop all the way clockwise and all the way anti-clockwise on both, how many turns actually is there on the preload? Well, I know that it's turned out 11 turns, but how many are there altogether? Well, in actual fact, there are 30 turns potentially that you can make. So I know it's turned 11/30ths now, so that gives me a better idea of where the suspension's set. Now the same goes for the screw, right? So there are 19 different clicks that you can have it on, and this is on click number 6. So again, I've got a good idea there of how this is set up. The other thing I found is that is a 14mm nut at the top of there, and the best way to do it is with a 14mm socket and an extension bar. If you try and get onto it with like a spanner or an adjustable or something, it's really difficult, but that's the best way to do it. Now also, there is not a lot of pressure against it. You don't really have to try too hard to actually turn the nut. It's quite straightforward, and the same goes with the screw as well. You don't need to apply a lot of force to that, but it's best to use a fairly sort of lightweight screwdriver to do it, because then you can actually feel the clicks through your fingers as you turn it. So there you go, there's a couple of top tips for you already. But now what I want to do is really get into the meat of it and have a look at how this bike is set up with me on top of it with all my gear on, and whether I've got the right amount of preload set first of all, and then once I've done the preload I'll come back and we'll look at the rebound. So let's get on and do that then. Right then, I've got to take a couple of measurements now. I need to measure this part here, and I need to measure it when there's absolutely no weight at all on the front wheel, and then I need to get on the bike. I need the bike to sag, and then measure it again and see what the distance is, or what the difference is between those two measurements. Now, apparently, if I was racing on a track, I'd want it around about 25-30 millimeters of sag. But for me, just as a road rider, I want it more like sort of 35-40 millimeters. So that's what I'm going to be aiming for. I've got absolutely no idea what it is at the moment. So what I'm going to do is measure this without any weight on the wheel. So got to solve that problem first of all. Quite difficult to do on your own, but then I thought, hang on a minute, I've got a headstand, so I can lift the front of the bike up, let all this unsprung weight hang loose below, and then I can measure that and we'll see what that comes out as to start with. So there we go, absolute genius. I've lifted the bike up in the air using the front stand and the rear stand as well, but the key point is this is being lifted up by the head, so this wheel is hanging loose, and I can measure this part of the suspension. So it comes in 135 mil. Okay, so I'm going to go and write that down, 135 mil, and then I need to measure it with me on the bike. Now then, the eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed that I put a zip tie around here. It's quite a common thing to do, and that way I can measure how much the suspension compresses. Right, I'm going to climb onto the bike now. I'm going to put all my weight onto it, taking my feet off the ground. And of course I'm wearing my big heavy jacket. I haven't got my helmet and my gloves on and stuff, but I'm pretty much as close as I can be to how much weight I would be normally on the bike. Now, there is a certain amount of friction built into the suspension, which means that it doesn't compress as fully as it might do. So what I actually need to do is take a measurement with me on the bike like it is now, and then I also need to do it where I just loosen up the suspension a little bit and then get somebody else to measure it for me. Now, I got the wife on this earlier, and she measured that suspension strut after I'd bounced it a few times, and I got that. I've written that down, and I'm going to take an average between that and what it looks like now. So that gives me an idea of, with me, all my weight on, how much the suspension compresses compared to how much it is when it's fully open. And as I say, the difference between the two should be somewhere around about 35 to 40 millimeters. Right, so here I am, just normally on the bike, and I'll have a look at where that zip tie is and make a measurement. And what I've got there is 105 millimeters between there and the top of that zip tie. So 105 millimeters. I've just gone back and looked at my notes, and I noticed that it was about 105 millimeters even when I did the sort of bouncing the front suspension and letting it settle. So we can safely say that with me sat on the bike, the distance is 105 mil, and when it's fully expanded, it's at 135 mil. So I've got a difference of 30 mil. Now, as I suspected, if I'm honest, I don't think that's quite enough. You see, when I've messed around with this before, and I've had a look at sort of how bouncy, if you like, the suspension is, it does feel like there should be a bit more give in it. There's two things that come to mind when I do that. One is, it doesn't seem like it's enough, particularly compared to like the rear of the bike, which is a lot more bouncy than the front. I guess that's probably right anyway, but it doesn't seem like there's enough. And also, it doesn't rebound quick enough. So I would expect it, hi cat, I would expect it to actually bounce a little bit more, to be a little bit more snappy when it comes back. Certainly in comparison with my wife's little 125, that feels a lot snappier. This just feels a little bit dead. So I reckon we can make this a lot better. First of all, I need to change that preload, and then I'm going to work on the rebound. Before I make any adjustments, what I want to do is a bit of a reference ride to see how the bike behaves now with its factory settings. So I'm going to go and take it on a road that I know, which quite frankly is awful. So that'll be a good test of the suspension. So let's go and do that, and then we'll come back here and I'll make a few changes. Right, I've probably done this road a massive disservice by calling it that rough. It's not actually that bad, it's just there's a few really good bumps in it. Now, for anybody who knows this area, it links Church down to Brockworth, and I'm just going to ride up here once this car's gone. Right, let's go. And the first thing that happens is we've got a bit of a blind right-hander. Should be able to hit this pretty rapidly. Okay, that's a little bit bumpy around there, but not too bad. And then coming along here, it's fairly smooth for a bit. There's a few wobbly bits like that, and it gets really a lot bit rougher in a minute. And I would say this is the road to come. Now at this point my audio gives up, and not that it was that great to start with. However, you can see that the road has a few bends and bumps that I'm getting through. I'm so used to it, but actually thinking about it more clearly, the back end really does feel like it's set for somebody a lot lighter than me, and the front just feels like it should be a lot tighter. Although I'm no expert on this, so it's really difficult for me to articulate exactly what the problem is. So let's just get back, have a tinker and try and sort it. Right then, so I'm going to make a quick change to this preload, and I've watched a lot of Dave Moss tuning videos, and I know that generally speaking you're always going to be 2 clicks out. So what I'm going to do is back it off by about 2 turns, I reckon, and then we'll see where we are. So if I do 1, 2, easy as that, that should change it and give me a little bit more, or a little bit less preload. Can't say it feels particularly different, but we'll see. Let's get on the bike and make some measurements. Yeah, that's now at exactly 100 mil. Yep. So that's good. Exactly 100 mil. Which means that I've now got a rider sag of exactly 35 mil, which I reckon is where it wants to be. So I'm going to go and take it for another ride now. See how that feels. I suspect it will feel much the same as it did before. It's just that I haven't got a chance now of the suspension either topping out or bottoming out. It's sitting right in the middle of where it should be. So that's great news. I've got that absolutely on point. Then I can start to look at the rebound, which is going to be, I think, a bit more of a challenge and make more of a difference. Right, here we go again. This time I've got the preload adjusted by 2 turns. Let's go into this blind right-hander. Nice. Actually, that felt a little bit better, unless it's just in my mind. So with just 2 turns to reduce the amount of preload on the front, it's soaking up these bumps much better, which is a real surprise. And the reason I say that is because I'm a bit of a blunt instrument, and I never thought for 1 minute that I'd feel any difference, but I definitely can. Now, it might be smoother, but I think there's still more to do because it definitely feels a little bit dead on this front end. So let's get back and start adjusting that rebound. Okay, so I'm really happy with how this is going. First of all, the measurements for the sag with me sat on the bike are just right. They're in the zone, just where I want them to be. Secondly, when I went for a ride on it, it definitely felt better. I'm sure it wasn't just in my head. It did feel good. And thirdly, I've got this zip tie which I've put around here to see where the suspension is coming to. Now, it bottoms out the suspension down here somewhere, so that's about 3/4 of the way down, which is exactly the zone you want it to be in. So I think my suspension is now operating in the right area. And if anything, I could probably just make it slightly softer, but that's absolutely fine. That's fine tuning for later on. I think that's good, and I'm really happy with it. So now what I need to work on is that rebound. Okay, when you're adjusting your preload and your sag, it's quite easy because you've got all sorts of measurements that you can take. And actually, even for a complete beginner like me, I've got the bike into a really good shape, certainly with that front end. And it didn't take long at all. It wasn't very difficult. Now, in terms of rebound, I think that's a different game altogether, because what I need to do with that is do it more by feel. There's nothing really that you can measure. So what I'm going to do is try the bike at the moment, see how it feels in its standard setup, and then I'm going to wind that rebound all the way out one way, try it again, and then wind it all the way the other way, so that I've got an idea of what it's like at its extremes, and then hopefully I can get it somewhere in between where it suits me. Okay, so I'm going to push down as hard as I can on the front with the front brake on, and then just let it bounce back on its own and see what happens. So that's not too bad. I mean, it goes down, it bounces back up and then settles. It still feels a little bit light. I mean, in comparison to other bikes I've tried that with, it's not quite as quick as I'd like. So let's try that with the dial turned all the way to the left. Ooh. Oh, that feels better. That comes back to where it should be really quickly. I'm liking that. I'll be honest, that looked good to me. Next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. It goes about 18 and a half, so I'll leave it on 18 and we'll see what that looks like. Some testers before then, pick the bike. I can already feel that's way too soft. Oh, I've killed it. Yeah, I think that is horrible. Oh, so much better. That feels bang on. It just goes bounce and stops. Really nice and sharp. and punchy. I like that. I think that's probably about right, but as I say, it's one of those settings that I'm probably going to be fiddling with forevermore. Right, let's get on the bike and go and take it for a test ride. Okay, so here we are again with my new setup. I've got to tell you, just riding here, which is only 10 minutes away, felt fantastic. The braking has massively improved as well, which is one thing I didn't think about. But that's brilliant. So let's go and have a ride up here, do exactly what we did before. And I've got a feeling this could be good. So round the first big bend. Oh, that's nice. Feels snappier. Everything about it feels better. In fact, I can even tell that the front end feels better now than the back end, which is sort of wallowing about and trying to keep up. It's soaking all this up brilliantly. That is way better than it was. God, I should have done this a very long time ago. I've got to tell you guys that in summary, this is well worth giving a go. It's all there in the user manual, so you are supposed to be able to do it yourself. But as I always say, this is not a how-to video. I'm just showing you how easy I found it. There are loads of resources out there on the internet and people you can pay to do the tuning for you if you're not confident. But I personally have found that this is one of the most rewarding changes that I've made to my bike. Now, I'm actually doing this voiceover a week later and I haven't changed anything since. Now, I'm sure it's not perfect and I know the suspension on the bike isn't that great, but as I always say to the missus, I have to work with what I've got. So next time around, I'm hoping for similar success on the rear suspension and I can't wait because now I'm conscious of it, I'm realising that I've been making do for far too long. So until then, keep your chain oiled and I'll see you soon.